Hi, folks. Tonight we travel far back in time to the dusty streets and towering ziggurats of ancient Babylon, where you wake up not as a farmer, not as a priest, but as one of the most important yet underappreciated people of your civilization, a scribe. You blink in the pale pre-dawn light, your straw mat pressing unevenly against your back, the faint sound of donkeys braying somewhere in the distance, the air smells of baked earth, and the faint traces of incense drifting from the nearby temple. Your first groggy thought, another long day of shaping wet clay with a sharp stick. It's romantic, isn't it? Until you realize you're about to sit for hours, hunched over a slab of slippery mud, under the constant scrutiny of your instructor. You probably won't survive this, at least not with clean fingernails. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and check if you're subscribed to the channel, because several viewers have been complaining that YouTube is removing their subscriptions, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit up, rubbing the sleep from your eyes, already dreading the inevitable moment when your reed stylus will slip, smearing wet clay across your tunic. In the distance, you hear the temple's first morning horn, a low, haunting sound that echoes through the city's labyrinth of mud brick alleys. Time to get moving. You slide into your simple linen garment, its fibers rough against your skin, and step outside into the humid warmth of early morning. The streets are quiet for now, save for a few traders rolling carts, loaded with barley and dates toward the market. Your bare feet make soft slaps against the packed dirt as you weave through the familiar paths, passing by the towering walls of the Ishtar Gate, brilliant blue glazed bricks that shimmer faintly even in the dim morning light. You pause for a moment, as you always do, to marvel at the lions striding across its surface, symbols of Babylon's strength and pride. But no time to linger. Your destination awaits. The Aduba, or Tablet House, the formal school where future scribes like you spend endless hours mastering the ancient art of cuneiform writing. Historians still argue whether the Aduba was open to all or restricted to the sons of elite families, though from your experience, it feels like only the persistent and stubborn survive here. You cross through a narrow courtyard where fellow students gather, some already practicing their wedge-shaped marks on slabs of discarded clay, others whispering about the notoriously severe instructor waiting inside. Your stomach tightens slightly, not because you don't know the day's lesson. You reviewed the signs for sheep, beer, and temple tax in your head at least a dozen times last night. But because no matter how much you prepare, the Aduba demands more, always more, you step up to the entrance, taking one last breath of the crisp morning air before plunging into the dim, cool interior of the school, where the walls are lined with rows of clay tablets, their wedge-shaped inscriptions immortalizing contracts, myths, and laws. Some of those tablets will bear your marks soon. If your hand doesn't cramp first, you take your place on the worn reed mat, cross-legged, with your tools spread out before you, a block of moist clay, your finely sharpened reed stylus, and a tablet from yesterday's practice that still bears the faint imprints of your efforts to perfect the cuneiform sign for barley. It doesn't look great. The wedges are crooked, the spacing uneven. But you tell yourself that today, you'll get it right. Around you, the low murmur of your fellow scribes in training fills the air, a quiet symphony of scratching, sighing, and the occasional muttered curse when someone smudges a line or snaps a stylus. Your instructor, an older scribe, with a perpetual frown etched as deeply into his face as the wedge marks in the tablets, paces the room like a predator, ready to swoop in and correct any mistake. You grip your stylus more tightly than necessary. The clay is still cool beneath your fingertips as you press in the first wedge of the morning, angling it just so, trying to avoid the too shallow impressions that earned you a scolding last time. Historians still argue about the exact number of signs in the cuneiform system at this time. Some say over 1,000, others argue that by the Neo-Babylonian period, it had been streamlined significantly. All you know is that you've been learning this set for years, and there are still plenty of signs that make your head spin. The stylus slips, and you barely avoid gouging an unintended line. You breathe out slowly. Patience. This is what it means to be a scribe. Not just knowing the signs, but mastering the subtle art of control, of pressure, of angle, of timing. Because each wedge is more than a mark. It's a message, a contract, a law, a prayer, and one mistake, it doesn't just ruin the tablet, it could ruin you. You glance over at the completed tablets stacked near the instructor's desk. There's a copy of the Code of Hammurabi there, or at least an excerpt, a particularly nasty law about false accusations that involves drowning. You shiver slightly, not because you think you'll be copying legal codes today, but because the weight of those wedge-shaped laws permeates everything you do here. It's not just about learning to write. It's about learning to uphold civilization itself. Across the room, a friend mutters something under his breath about how he'd rather be in the market, hawking dates, or maybe apprenticed to a potter, working with his hands in a different way. You chuckle softly, but you know the truth. Being a scribe is as close to power and status as most people like you will ever get. Priests and kings might issue decrees, but it's scribes who make them permanent. You lean forward again, your stylus poised above the clay, and begin inscribing the next sign, Lugal, king. A straightforward enough sign, but one that reminds you, with every stroke, of who your ultimate masters are. Not just the instructors, but the city's priests, the palace officials, the merchants who need contracts, and even the gods themselves. Your hand cramps after a dozen more signs, and you pause to flex your fingers, shaking out the tension. The clay dust clings stubbornly to your skin, wedging itself under your fingernails, where it will stay long after the lesson ends. This is your life, now shaping clay into words, one painstaking wedge at a time. Outside, the city of Babylon is waking up. The sounds of traders haggling, animals braying, and the rhythmic slap of sandals against sun-baked streets starting to filter in through the open doorway. But here in the Eduba, the air is thick with concentration, and the quiet determination of those who know that their future depends on mastering this ancient, elegant, infuriating system of signs. You glance at your tablet again, assessing your latest row of symbols. Not bad, maybe even good enough to avoid correction. But you know there's still a long road ahead, because this isn't just a skill, it's a lifetime, and you've only just begun. Your fingers are already sore, and it's not even mid-morning yet. The instructor calls out the next sign to copy she, grain. You suppress a groan, grain. Again, it's always grain. Because here in Babylon, grain isn't just something you eat. It's the very foundation of the economy. Every transaction, every temple offering, every laborer's wage is calculated in barley rations. And it's your job, or rather, your future job, to keep track of all of it. You press your stylus into the clay, angling it just right to form the series of wedges that make up the symbol for Eshi. The instructor leans over your shoulder, grunts approvingly, and moves on. A small victory, but you don't have time to celebrate. The next word is even more complex. E2 Gal, the palace. You glance at the reference tablet, its surface crammed with wedge marks more intricate than a spider's web. How did the master scribes make it look so effortless? You remind yourself that they, too, once sat where you are now, struggling to keep their wedge angles uniform, their lines straight, their spacing even. It's humbling. Historians still argue about just how early scribes began their training. Some say as young as 5. Others suggest more formal instruction began closer to 10. But either way, it's clear that being a scribe wasn't something you just picked up. It was a craft honed over years, maybe decades. You shift your weight on the hard mat, wiping a bead of sweat from your brow as the instructor barks out corrections to someone else across the room. Another mistake, another sigh, another smudge of clay wiped away. You can't help but steal a glance at the senior scribes practicing on the far side of the Adaba. Their styluses move fluidly, their signs precise, their tablets clean and professional. They're everything you're striving to be, but there's a cost. You've heard the whispers, sore wrists that never heal, backs permanently hunched, eyes ruined by years of squinting at damp clay under flickering lamplight. Being a scribe might be prestigious, but it's not easy. You return your focus to your tablet, steadying your hand as you carve the next sign. The clay resists slightly, too dry in spots, too soft in others. But you adjust instinctively, having learned that working with clay is about balance. Not too much pressure, not too little, just enough to make your mark without cracking the surface. You glance at your completed line and let out a small, satisfied exhale. It's starting to feel natural now, like the clay is an extension of your thoughts, your hand, your very being. Outside, you hear the faint sound of a flute drifting through the alleyways. A musician setting up near the market, perhaps, serenading the crowds that are beginning to gather for the day's trade. But here, inside the Adaba, time feels different, slower, more deliberate, because in this room, each moment is marked not by the passing of hours, but by the accumulation of signs on clay, one after the other, row after row, tablet after tablet, until One day, you too will be a master scribe, able to draft contracts for merchants, inscribe edicts for kings, and record prayers for priests. Until then, though, you will keep practicing, because here in Babylon, the city of mighty walls and towering ziggurats, the scribe is the silent architect of civilization, and you are well on your way to becoming one of them. The morning heat is already beginning to seep through the mud brick walls of the Aduba as the instructor announces the next task. Copy a passage from the Epic of Gilgamesh. Your pulse quickens. This is no mundane list of barley rations or livestock inventories. This is literature, the story of a hero who challenged the gods, battled monsters, and searched for immortality. And now, your hands are responsible for bringing part of that tale to life on clay. You pull a fresh tablet toward you, smoothing the surface with your palm until it's ready for the stylus. You glance at the master copy, a beautifully inscribed passage describing Gilgamesh's grief after the death of Enkidu. You can practically hear the lament in the rhythmic arrangement of the signs. But here's the trick. It's not just about copying the meaning. It's about replicating the exact form. Every wedge, every line break, every nuance of the original scribe's hand. Historians still argue whether these copies were made purely for training purposes or as a way to preserve multiple records for different archives. Either way, for you, it's a test. You steady your stylus and press the first wedge, then the next, carving Gilgamesh's sorrow into the clay with deliberate care. By the time you finish the first line, your hand is cramping, but your heart is soaring, because this is the pinnacle of being a scribe, connecting with the great works of your culture, ensuring that the stories of kings and gods endure for generations. You glance up and notice one of the senior scribes watching you, offering the faintest nod of approval before returning to his own work. It's a small gesture, but it means everything. You've heard tales of scribes who became so skilled that they were invited to work directly in the royal court or within the inner sanctums of the temple libraries. The best among them weren't just copyists. They were scholars, historians, philosophers. You wonder briefly if that could ever be you. But first, finish this passage. The next few lines flow more easily. Your hand adjusts instinctively to the natural variations in the clay's texture, your stylus making clean, confident impressions. You're getting lost in the work now. The world outside, the Adaba fading into a blur of market noises, footsteps, and distant voices. You're just here, in this space, translating the epic struggles of Gilgamesh into a physical form that will endure long after your own bones have turned to dust. It's a strange kind of immortality, isn't it? Not through heroic deeds, but through language, through preservation, through the meticulous labor of writing. The instructor walks past, pausing briefly to scan your work. Better, he says curtly, moving on, and that's as good as praise. Gets in the Adaba. You glance down at the completed section, not perfect, but solid. You press your seal, a small cylindrical stone, etched with your family's insignia, into the corner of the tablet, marking it as your work. That simple roll across the soft clay transforms the piece from a generic exercise into something uniquely yours, a record of your progress, a fragment of your identity. You set the tablet aside to dry, the clay hardening slowly as the morning sun climbs higher, casting shafts of light through the open doorway and across the packed earth floor. Your fingers ache, your back protests, but your heart is light, because for all its tedium, for all its physical strain, being a scribe allows you to participate in something much larger than yourself, the preservation of Babylon's collective memory, and that, you remind yourself as you flex your sore hand, is worth every cramp and callus. The midday heat presses heavily against the thick mud brick walls, but inside the adaba, the air remains cool and still, filled only with the faint scrape of styluses against clay. You shift your weight on the woven reed mat, stretching your cramped legs as the instructor approaches with the next assignment, trade records. You suppress a sigh. Gone are the poetic cadences of Gilgamesh. Now, it's back to the lifeblood of Babylon's bureaucratic machine, meticulously logging the daily flow of goods and services that fuel the city's economy. You accept the new clay tablet and glance at the list of terms. Sheep delivered to temple, 6. Dates supplied to palace, 20 measures. Silver owed by merchant Dagon Eden, half shekel. The transactions are endless, repetitive, but essential, because without scribes like you, Babylon's complex system of trade and taxation would collapse into chaos. Every contract, every shipment, every tax, recorded, preserved, enforceable. Historians still argue whether Babylon's scribes acted primarily as neutral recorders or as active enforcers of economic systems. But from where you're sitting, hunched over your clay slab, it hardly matters. You're simply the one making sure that every transaction is immortalized in neat, legible cuneiform. You steady your hand and press the first wedge. Sheep, you've done this 1,000 times before, and yet each repetition feels just as demanding. Because if you make a mistake, if you misplace a wedge, misalign a numeral, or confuse a name, you could spark disputes, ruin reputations, or worse, provoke the wrath of temple administrators known for their unforgiving audits. The weight of that responsibility settles heavily on your shoulders as you move to the next entry. Dates supplied to palace. You imagine the rows of towering date palms beyond the city walls, their fruit gathered and bundled by workers at dawn, transported along dusty roads to the city, and finally delivered to the palace kitchens, where feasts for priests, nobles, and foreign emissaries are prepared. All of it, tracked by you, sealed in clay, a record for the gods and for posterity. You pause to wipe your brow, noticing the telltale streaks of clay dust that now coat your hands and forearms, a badge of your profession, worn with both pride and fatigue. Across the room, another scribe in training groans audibly, having just smeared his tablet beyond repair. He sighs, picks up a new slab of clay, and starts over. You've been there. Everyone has. Because being a scribe isn't just about precision, it's about perseverance. You glance at the next line. Silver owed by merchant Dagon Eden. Dagon Eden. You've recorded his debts so many times, you feel like you know him personally. A merchant renowned for his booming voice, elaborate jewelry, and perpetual inability to settle accounts on time. You smirk slightly as you press the corresponding signs into the clay, imagining his exasperated protests when the temple officials come to collect. There's humor here in these dry, transactional records, tiny glimpses of the human stories woven through the fabric of Babylon's vast economy. You finish the last entry and set the tablet aside to dry, the sunlight catching the glistening, wet clay as it begins its slow transformation into something hard, durable, and permanent. Another document for the archives, another piece of Babylon's complex web of commerce and law. You stretch your aching fingers and glance out the open doorway where the sounds of the bustling market grow louder as the city fully awakens. Vendors shouting prices, donkeys braying under heavy loads, children darting between stalls piled high with grain, fish, wool, and copper. And you, the silent architect behind the scenes, ensuring that it all runs smoothly, that every deal, every debt, every delivery is recorded and remembered. It's not glamorous, but it is indispensable. You return to your mat, retrieve a fresh tablet, and prepare for the next set of transactions. Because here in Babylon, trade never sleeps, and neither, it seems, do the scribes who keep it all running. The instructor claps his hands sharply, signaling a change in task. You set aside your latest trade record, flexing your aching fingers, and await the next assignment. He picks up a well-worn tablet from a nearby shelf and announces, "Legal codes." Your stomach tightens slightly. This is where precision isn't just important, it's everything. Because when you're recording laws, a misplaced wedge isn't just a mistake. It's a potential miscarriage of justice. You slide a new, smooth clay tablet onto your mat, taking extra care to ensure it's properly shaped, edges crisp, surface flat. There's no room for sloppy work here. The instructor dictates slowly, "If a man steals an ox," ah yes, the Code of Hammurabi. You've copied these laws so many times that some feel burned into your very muscle memory. But still, you proceed carefully, pressing each wedge with deliberate precision. He shall restore 5 oxen in place of the stolen ox. You glance at the reference tablet, noting the exact arrangement of signs. Even the spacing carries meaning. Historians still argue about whether scribes had any editorial discretion when copying legal codes, or if they were expected to reproduce the text exactly, even down to minor stylistic flourishes. From your experience, there's no room for interpretation. It's pure fidelity, because these laws are the backbone of Babylonian society, etched into stone monuments for all to see or pressed into clay tablets for use in courtrooms and temple archives. Your mind drifts briefly to the monumental stele that bears the entire code, standing proudly in the temple courtyard, topped by the carved image of King Hammurabi receiving authority from the sun god Shamash. You've seen it many times, its imposing form both inspiring and intimidating. And now, here you are, contributing to that same tradition, ensuring the laws endure not just through public monuments, but through practical, portable copies that judges and officials can reference as needed. You move on to the next law, carving carefully. If a builder constructs a house and it collapses, the infamous law about structural integrity, It sends a shiver down your spine every time you write it out. The consequences for failure are severe, to put it mildly. You press the final wedge and lean back slightly, exhaling as you review the tablet. No mistakes, at least none that you can see. The instructor passes behind you, glances at your work, and with a curt nod, moves on. Relief washes over you. You set the tablet aside to dry, placing it with the others that, once hardened, will be stored in the temple's legal archives, a permanent record of the rules that govern your world. Outside, the city's familiar sounds continue unabated. Merchants calling out their wares, priests chanting in distant temples, the steady thrum of daily life moving ever forward. But here, within the Aduba, time feels suspended, each moment measured, not by the passage of hours, but by the careful accumulation of wedge-shaped marks on soft clay. You clean your stylus, wiping the clay residue from its tip, and prepare for the next task, because here in Babylon, being a scribe isn't just about writing, it's about preserving the very fabric of society, its laws, its commerce, its stories, and its beliefs, one tablet at a time. Your hands barely get a moment's rest before the next assignment arrives, a set of healing rituals and incantations requested by the temple priests. You suppress a sigh, not out of boredom, but out of sheer caution. These are some of the most delicate and dangerous texts to copy, because unlike trade records or legal codes, these aren't simply bureaucratic necessities. These are believed to hold power, real, spiritual, sometimes even supernatural power. You carefully press your palm over a new tablet, smoothing its surface as the instructor brings over the reference copy, an ancient, worn tablet filled with intricate instructions for driving out malevolent spirits and curing sleeplessness, headaches, or even infertility. Historians still argue about whether Babylonian scribes believed in the efficacy of these incantations themselves, or whether they regarded them more as cultural tradition, one more part of the scribe's professional toolkit. But as you begin carving the first wedge, invoking Ea, the god of wisdom and magic, you feel the weight of millennia of belief resting on your shoulders. You know better than to take this lightly. The text calls for a ritual purification, a mixture of river clay, juniper ash, and the smoke of cedar wood. You can almost smell the aromatic haze as you inscribe the formula into the clay. Then come the chants, long strings of syllables, their meaning known only to the most educated priests, but their power unquestioned by those seeking healing. Your hand moves slowly, ensuring that each wedge is precise. After all, a misplaced mark could mean a failed ritual or an offended deity. You've heard stories of scribes who made such mistakes, of rituals that backfired, of priests who publicly shamed the offending writer. You have no intention of joining their ranks. You finish one line, then another, pausing only to stretch your cramping fingers. The Aduba is quiet, save for the faint sounds of styluses at work and the instructor pacing slowly, his sandals making a soft slap against the packed earth floor. You glance at the next section of the text, a spell for protecting a newborn from Lamashtu, the dreaded demoness who preys on mothers and infants. The instructions are chilling. Place a figurine of a lion-headed demon at the head of the cradle. Recite the charm 7 times. You carve it meticulously, imagining the relief of the parents who would call upon this ritual to keep their child safe. Another reminder that your role as a scribe isn't just to record, but to enable the transmission of vital knowledge, belief, and protection. You glance up at the shelf where dozens of similar tablets are already stored. Rows upon rows of rituals, incantations, medicinal recipes, and prayers. A vast archive of Babylonian wisdom, preserved not in paper, but in the durable, timeless medium of clay. You know that centuries from now, long after you and everyone in this city have turned to dust, these tablets may still exist, tucked away in some forgotten storeroom, waiting to be unearthed by future scholars. It's a humbling thought. You finish the final line of the ritual, set your stylus down, and carefully place the tablet in the drying area, where it will harden under the day's heat. Your hands ache, your eyes sting, but your heart is full, because you've done your part, preserving not just the rules and transactions of your society, but its hopes, fears, and spiritual defenses. You wipe your hands on your tunic, retrieve another lump of clay, and prepare for the next task, because here in Babylon, the work of a scribe never ends. Your next assignment arrives with a bit more ceremony than usual. The instructor approaches with a monumental inscription order, a draft of the dedication text for a new public stele that will soon stand in the marketplace, proclaiming the accomplishments of a local governor. You can almost feel the collective gaze of generations yet unborn pressing down on you as you prepare the clay tablet that will serve as the draft for the final stone carving. This isn't a trade ledger that will be tucked away in a dusty archive. This is something meant for public display, carved in basalt or limestone, erected where all of Babylon can see it. And it starts here, with you, shaping the words, first in clay. You press the first wedge carefully into the soft surface, by the favor of Marduk, always Marduk, the patron deity of Babylon, the mighty one whose temple, the Esagila, looms over the city with imposing grandeur. Your mind flashes briefly to the last time you saw a completed stele, its black surface towering above the market, square, every line of cuneiform crisp and deep, the figure of the governor chiseled in elaborate relief at the top. Historians still argue whether scribes had significant input in the crafting of these public inscriptions, or whether they simply recorded what the governor dictated, word for word. But right now, it doesn't feel like you have much choice. The text has been provided, and your task is to render it perfectly, ensuring that when the stone carver gets it, there are no ambiguities, no doubts about where each wedge and line should go. Your hand moves steadily, forming the honorifics, the genealogy of the governor, son of so-and-so, who is son of so-and-so, as is tradition. You can't help but smile at how much of these inscriptions is devoted to establishing lineage. Babylonians understood well that memory fades quickly, but stone and clay endure. You reach the part where the governor boasts of his latest achievement, the construction of a new canal linking 2 tributaries of the Euphrates, a feat that will improve trade and irrigation for the region. You carve the words carefully, thinking about the farmers who will benefit, the merchants who will now be able to transport goods more easily. But of course, the inscription doesn't mention them, only the governor. You suppress a chuckle. As always, history is written by those who commission the tablets and steles, and by scribes like you who give those boasts physical form. You adjust your posture, ensuring the spacing remains consistent as you near the end. May this monument stand for all time. It's a common enough closing, but one that always gives you a moment's pause, because you know better than most how true it is. You've seen tablets and steles from centuries ago, their messages still clear, their wedge marks surviving countless floods, wars, and regime changes. The permanence of your work is part of what drew you to this profession in the first place. When you're gone, your words will remain. You set the completed draft tablet aside carefully, marking it with your personal seal. Soon, a stonemason will use this draft to chisel the final inscription, climbing precariously atop scaffolding to carve each wedge into unforgiving rock. But in a very real sense, the monument is already halfway finished, because it's your hand that shaped its language, its form, its voice. You flex your fingers, soar from the precision work, and allow yourself a small moment of pride. Then you pick up another tablet, because while governors may revel in their monuments, scribes know the truth. It all begins with clay. You don't get long to bask in your small moment of accomplishment before the instructor assigns your next task, a routine contract between two merchants over a shipment of copper ingots. You roll your shoulders, now stiff from hours of careful work, and smooth out a fresh tablet. It's back to the day-to-day commerce that keeps Babylon running. The merchants stand nearby, waiting as you prepare to inscribe their agreement. You glance at both men, one with hands rough from years of loading cargo onto barges, the other with robes far too fine for someone claiming to be a simple trader. You smirk quietly to yourself, but say nothing. Your role here is to be impartial, the silent witness who ensures their deal is carved permanently into clay. Historians still argue about whether scribes were neutral observers or sometimes leaned into roles as legal advisors, nudging negotiations with their own interpretations. But you know that, at least officially, your job is to record, not to judge. You begin with the date. In the reign of King Nabu Apla-iddina, standard procedure. Then you proceed to outline the terms, the number of copper ingots, the weight of each, the payment schedule, the penalties for non-delivery. You press each wedge carefully, double-checking the numerical signs. Babylon's complex sexagesimal system means that a misplaced wedge could turn 60 into 600, and no one wants that kind of disaster. The merchants hover behind you, one impatiently tapping his foot, the other nervously adjusting his headdress. You've seen this scene play out 100 times. The stakes are always higher for the merchants than for the scribe. For you, it's another day, another contract. For them, it could mean profit or ruin. You finish the main body of the text and then hand each man his stylus to add their own personal mark, a crude symbol, a signature of sorts. Though few merchants can write fluently, you help them position their styluses. guiding their hands to press a simple identifying shape onto the tablet. Then, finally, you roll your own seal across the corner, officially validating the document. It's done. The merchants exchange terse nods, one handing over a small pouch of silver as the first installment of payment. You watch them disappear into the crowd outside, already swept up in the constant movement and noise of the Babylonian market. You set the tablet on a shelf to dry, alongside dozens of others just like it. Contracts, agreements, marriage arrangements, loan records, all of them silent witnesses to the everyday dealings that keep this vast, ancient city alive. You flex your sore fingers, wipe a smear of clay from your wrist, and take a moment to glance through the doorway of the Adaba. The afternoon sun slants low now, casting long shadows across the market stalls and the distant outline of the towering ziggurat. Somewhere beyond those walls, river barges glide slowly down the Euphrates, loaded with the very copper you just finished documenting. It's a strange thing to realize how your simple act of recording shapes the flow of commerce, determining who owes what, who owns what, and what is fair. Without scribes, none of it would work. You sit back on your mat for a moment, allowing yourself a brief pause. Another contract complete. Another contribution to Babylon's vast archive of civilization. But there's still time left in the day, and no shortage of clay to mold. You're midway through prepping another tablet when the instructor calls out a new request, this time from the temple. You look up. It's a familiar phrase: ritual inventory and supply records, which means one thing: hours of logging incense, oils, sacrificial animals, and other offerings down to the last grain. Not the most glamorous part of being a scribe, but arguably the most politically sensitive, because when it comes to the temple, even a minor error could provoke the gods, or worse, the priests. You retrieve a fresh slab of clay, smoothing its surface with care, then begin writing. On the third day of the lunar cycle, under the blessing of Shamash, the following items were received. You pause for a moment, mentally counting the proper sequence of signs for frankincense and myrrh. The temple prefers the longer, more elaborate names, as if linguistic flourishes somehow make the offerings more holy. You comply, not because you believe it makes a difference to the gods, but because you know the high priest is the one who will be reviewing your work, and he has opinions, many. Historians still argue whether these inventories were actual receipts, records of genuine donations, or more of a ritual performance, a kind of spiritual accounting to keep the divine and human realms in harmony. Either way, the clay doesn't care. It just waits to be filled. You press your stylus into the soft tablet again, carving in the number of oxen offered at the morning ritual, then baskets of barley, jars of oil, bolts of dyed wool. You imagine the procession itself, servants lugging offerings in long lines toward the temple, incense curling up in fragrant ribbons through the air, bells chiming from priests' belts. It's a theatrical performance, but one grounded in a deep fear that if these offerings aren't recorded, remembered, and balanced, the gods might turn away. Your hand begins to cramp again. You flex it briefly, then continue. You reach a line about sacred water, collected from The Euphrates at dawn. You press the sign for water, followed by the divine determinative. It's strange to think that water, so abundant and often dirty, can be labeled holy just by where and when it's gathered. But that's part of your job too, distinguishing not just what things are, but what they mean, symbol and substance. You set the finished tablet aside to dry, your palm now streaked with lines of dusty clay. Soon, temple attendants will come to collect it, and your handwriting will be scrutinized for accuracy, legibility, and reverence. You've heard stories, scribes accused of blasphemy over a smudged god name, fined or even banished for mixing up an offering sequence. You take a deep breath and prepare the next inventory slate. Because if Babylon is a city of trade and law and war and worship, then scribes are the ones making sure it all fits on record. And when it comes to the gods, no detail is too small. The temple tablets are barely set aside when another set of instructions lands in your lap. This time, it's something a bit more prestigious. A letter from a royal official to be drafted and sent to a neighboring city-state. You sit up straighter. Now, this is important work. A letter isn't just a simple record. It's a piece of diplomacy, a carefully crafted tool that can strengthen alliances, issue warnings, or demand tribute. And it's your job to make sure every word is correct, respectful, and powerful. You select a high-quality clay tablet, finer and more carefully prepared than the rough, quick-dry ones used for daily inventories. This will be handled by royal couriers and delivered by hand, traveling for days, possibly weeks, across the desert and through foreign cities. The official dictates the message to the governor of Larsa in the name of Nabu, god of wisdom. Of course, always invoke a deity first, then the formal greeting, as customary. May your household prosper. May your fields yield abundantly. You suppress a smirk. These formalities are so standard, you could write them in your sleep. But then comes the heart of the message, a request for additional shipments of timber and stone for the king's latest building project, a new canal to link two tributaries of the Euphrates. You press each wedge with extra care, ensuring the numbers and quantities are clear and exact. No room for ambiguity in a diplomatic letter. Historians still argue about how much creative license scribes had when drafting such correspondences. Were they mere recorders or subtle advisors, shaping the tone and content behind the scenes? As your stylus moves steadily over the clay, you know the truth lies somewhere in between. You may be transcribing the words of your superiors, but you're also choosing how to frame them, how to place each line for maximum clarity and impact. You pause as you reach the section requesting faster delivery. The king's project must not be delayed, a polite phrase, but with an unmistakable edge. You wonder briefly how the governor of Larsa will interpret it. With respect, with annoyance, with fear, that's not your concern. Your concern is getting the message right. You finish with the standard closing. By the favor of Marduk, may your health endure. Then, you roll the official seal across the clay, a beautifully carved cylinder depicting a scene of the king in audience with the god Enlil. You watch as the intricate design unfurls like a miniature relief sculpture, wrapping around the tablet with elegant precision. The seal is as important as the words themselves. It confirms the message's authenticity, a guarantee that this tablet truly represents the voice of Babylon's government. You set the tablet aside, allowing it to harden just enough for safe transport, then wrap it in a layer of reed matting to protect it on its long journey. Soon, a royal courier will arrive, take the tablet, and set off across the wide plains and narrow mountain passes of Mesopotamia, ensuring that your carefully pressed words reach their destination intact. And though your name isn't on the letter, you know your hand is what made it possible. The thought gives you a quiet sense of satisfaction. You glance at the instructor, who gives a rare, approving nod. Then you wipe the clay dust from your palms, pick up your stylus, and prepare for whatever message or contract or ritual comes next. Because in Babylon, the work of a scribe is never done, and every tablet, no matter how small, shapes the fate of empires. The next task brings a different sort of challenge, preparing a mathematical tablet for the temple school. You let out a quiet breath. These are always tricky, not because you don't know the math. You do, well enough. It's because these tablets must be utterly flawless. They'll be used by future students, training to become scribes just like you, practicing their calculations on these very patterns. The instructor hands you the reference, a series of square roots and volume calculations for irrigation canals. You glance over the complex arrangement of sexagesimal numbers, Babylon's infamous base 60 system. 60, not 10, always 60. You smooth the tablet carefully, then press the first sign, the number 3, then 7, then 12. Your stylus dances over the clay, building the array of numbers, aligning them in neat columns. Each must be perfectly spaced, not just for clarity, but out of respect for the tradition of Babylonian mathematics, the system that has kept farmers' fields watered and merchants' ledgers balanced for centuries. Historians still argue whether these mathematical innovations were driven by practical needs, irrigation, architecture, trade, or whether they emerged from a pure love of abstract problem solving. But here, in the quiet of the Adaba, with only the scrape of your stylus and the distant sound of the water slapping the city's walls, it doesn't feel like either. It just feels necessary. You press the next number carefully, double-checking its alignment, because if you mess this up, a future student could learn the wrong method for calculating land area or volume, and that mistake could cascade across fields, taxes, and court disputes. The pressure is subtle, but it's there. You finish the first line and lean back for a moment, flexing your cramped hand. You remember, not long ago, being the one copying from tablets like this, under the stern gaze of an instructor. Now, you're the one creating the tools that others will learn from. The thought makes you sit a little straighter. You glance at the next section, a formula for calculating the area of a trapezoidal plot of land. You press the formula into the clay carefully, remembering the merchant who once demanded you calculate precisely how much land he could buy for a half shekel of silver. That deal hinged on these calculations. As abstract as these numbers may seem, they determine the wealth, power, and even the survival of those who rely on them. You press the final number, check your work twice, then set the tablet aside to dry. Your fingers ache, but there's a quiet satisfaction in knowing you've added another link to the long chain of Babylonian knowledge, a system that will shape commerce, agriculture, and education long after you're gone. You brush the clay dust from your lap, glance at the next pile of prepared tablets waiting for your attention, and reach for the next one. Because even when the numbers are perfect, the work is never done. You take a moment to stretch your back, the sun now hanging low, casting long, golden beams across the aduba's clay walls, turning the packed earth floor into a warm mosaic of light and shadow. Your shoulders are stiff, your fingers coated in a fine film of clay dust, but there's no pause, no true rest. The instructor approaches again, handing you a prepared tablet with a simple nod. You already know what this means. It's time to prepare a literacy tablet for the younger apprentices. You exhale slowly. At first glance, these seem like the easiest tasks. No complex legal jargon, no calculations or political nuance. But in truth, these are some of the most important and precise of all your assignments. You're about to create the first tool that an entire new generation of scribes will use to learn their craft. You sit, cross-legged, smoothing the tablet's soft clay with a wet reed, making sure there are no imperfections or air bubbles. Even the slightest flaw could mislead a student trying to decipher the exact placement and angle of each wedge. You grip your stylus and begin carefully inscribing the standard syllabary. First, A, a simple vertical wedge, then Ba, one wedge followed by two smaller ones, angled just so. Then Ku, the repetitive, meditative process unfolds like a kind of ritual. Tap, press, pull. The signs must be not only accurate, but beautiful in their own way. Because beauty, in the context of cuneiform, means clarity, the exact shape and proportion that makes each symbol immediately recognizable to a novice's eye. Historians still argue whether these educational tablets were strictly tools for rote memorization, or if they carried a kind of philosophical significance, introducing young scribes to the very essence of Babylonian thought and language. You suspect it's both. You remember your own first literacy tablet well, the feel of the wet clay beneath your fingers, the stern voice of your first instructor correcting your grip on the stylus, the mixture of pride and terror as you carved your first hesitant wedge, knowing it would be reviewed by eyes far more practiced than yours. That experience shaped you as it will shape the new students watching you now from across the Aduba's open hall. You glance up briefly and catch the wide-eyed gaze of a boy no older than 10, seated in the far corner, clutching a lump of clay with nervous fingers. You give him a subtle nod and return to your work. The next line, Kai, Lu, Mi. Your stylus moves with a steady rhythm, carving each symbol with precision, ensuring the lines are straight, the angles sharp, the spacing consistent, because this tablet won't just teach these signs, it will model what proper cuneiform looks like. The discipline, the patience, the care that defines your entire profession. You add the determinatives, the little signs that mark divinity, places, occupations. You remember how long it took you to understand why some signs needed these subtle additions, while others did not, and how a misplaced determinative could change the entire meaning of a text, transforming a simple reference into a declaration of divine authority, or a terrible insult. Your hand cramps slightly, but you shake it off. There's no room for fatigue in this kind of work. These signs must be perfect, because long after you finish this tablet and set it on the drying rack, it will be handled by dozens, maybe hundreds of students, each one tracing the grooves with their own stylus, imitating your marks, copying them onto their own practice tablets. Your hand, your choices, your precision, passed down generation by generation through the silent medium of clay. You pause for a moment to flex your fingers, listening to the familiar sounds of the adaba around you, the gentle scrape of styluses against clay, the quiet murmur of instructors correcting students, the rhythmic chant of a group reciting the standard signs aloud in unison. Outside, the marketplace buzzes faintly in the distance. Merchants selling grain, craftsmen shouting prices, donkeys braying under heavy loads. But here inside the adaba, there is only the slow, deliberate cadence of learning. You return to your tablet, completing the last row of syllables, then adding a brief sample sentence for the students to copy. Something simple, but essential. The scribe prepares the tablet, a phrase that not only teaches basic structure, but subtly reminds the apprentice of their future role. You press your seal into the corner of the clay, marking the tablet as your work, your legacy. You set it aside carefully on the drying shelf, alongside other tablets of all sizes and purposes, contracts, poems, rituals, letters, and now a new literacy tablet. You wipe the clay dust from your hands and glance once more at the younger students, some nervously scratching at their own practice slabs. You wonder how many of them will go on to sit where you sit now. How many will endure the long years of training, the sore fingers, the mental strain, the subtle pride that comes with mastering the written word. You stand and stretch, the light now fading fast as evening approaches. And you know that tomorrow there will be another tablet to make, another set of signs to press, another lesson to pass on. Because in Babylon, the work of a scribe never ends, and neither does the need to teach those who will one day take your place. The daylight fades into the soft amber tones of early evening, and with it comes a different kind of assignment, something many scribes find more taxing than trade contracts or temple inventories. Correspondence for private citizens. You sigh quietly as the instructor hands you the next tablet. These personal letters are often more tedious than their length suggests, filled with overwrought emotions, veiled insults, or elaborate requests for things no one truly needs. But they're just as important to Babylon's fabric as royal decrees or trade records, because they preserve the personal stories of the city's inhabitants, their fears, their hopes, their grievances. You smooth the tablet's surface with your damp reed, then glance at the dictation, a merchant's letter to his cousin in the northern city of Sippar, requesting repayment of a loan and reminding him, rather pointedly, of a promise made during a festival 2 years prior. You raise an eyebrow, suppressing a smile. Historians still argue whether these personal letters served primarily as legal evidence or if they reflected genuine attempts at maintaining relationships across distances. But here, in this moment, you know they're a little of both. You begin inscribing the standard opening. To my cousin and brother in the gods, may Shamash watch over you and your household. The flowery greeting is expected, though it always makes you wonder how often the actual sentiment matches the words. You continue. It has been many months since last we drank together beneath the date palms. The city of Babylon thrives, and I trust that you, too, are in health. Your stylus moves steadily, crafting each wedge with practiced precision. But your mind drifts to the scene the letter evokes. Two merchants seated beneath swaying palms, clay cups of beer in hand, discussing trade and family alliances, now separated by distance and commerce. You return to the task at hand, pressing the main point of the letter. I write to remind you of the debt. 2 shekels of silver, promised at the festival of Ishtar. There it is, the heart of the message, wrapped in polite formalities, but unmistakable in its urgency. You've seen this 1,000 times. Personal debts, clothed in the language of kinship and piety, but debts all the same. The next lines are more insistent. Let not time cause you to forget this obligation, for the silver is needed to secure goods for the coming season's trade. You press the signs firmly, knowing that this letter will soon be sealed, wrapped, and handed to a courier, who will travel by donkey along dusty roads for days, risking bandits and storms just to deliver these few lines. You finish the letter with the customary blessing. May Marduk and Ishtar grant you peace, prosperity, and many sons. Then you roll the merchant's personal seal across the tablet's corner, a simple image of a standing goat, likely representing his family or trademark. You add your own scribe mark discreetly on the back, identifying yourself as the one who crafted the text. As you set the tablet aside to dry, you glance at the growing pile of personal correspondence, waiting for your attention. Letters to family members, requests for marriage alliances, complaints about neighbors' property disputes, all of them ordinary, all of them essential to the invisible web that holds Babylon's society together. You think about the lives these letters touch, the cousin in Sippar who may sigh in frustration upon receiving this reminder, the merchant here in Babylon pacing his home, anxiously awaiting a reply. It strikes you, not for the first time, that being a scribe means acting as a kind of invisible mediator, carrying messages across time and space, giving form to the most private thoughts and the most public declarations. You pause to stretch your legs, moving to the open doorway of the aduba for a breath of air. The marketplace is quieter now, with only a few vendors packing up their wares and stray dogs sniffing at discarded scraps. The great ziggurat looms dark against the indigo sky, its summit shrouded in mist and mystery. A group of temple priests passes by, their linen robes rustling softly as they make their way toward evening prayers. You return to your mat, clean your stylus, and prepare for the next letter. Another personal plea, another transaction, another echo of the thousands of human dramas unfolding in the city around you. Because here, in Babylon, life isn't just about the grand monuments or royal proclamations. It's about these quiet, persistent communications, the slow weave of relationships, obligations, and memories, all inscribed in fragile but enduring clay. You press your hand gently against the surface of the next tablet, feeling its cool smoothness, ready once again to transform it into something living, something that will travel beyond these walls, carrying a fragment of someone's voice, their need, their presence, and as always, your own voice remains silent, yet everywhere, embedded in the careful, deliberate shapes you leave behind. As the night air cools, and the torches along the aduba walls are lit, casting flickering shadows across the clay tablet racks, you settle into what might be your final task of the day, preparing an astronomical observation tablet for the temple's scholars. This is no ordinary record. This is about the heavens. You can feel a quiet hum of reverence as you press your palm against the prepared clay surface, smoothing it carefully, knowing that the signs you are about to inscribe will help guide ritual calendars, agricultural cycles, and perhaps even prophecies. The head astronomer approaches, unfurling a thin clay draft with the recorded observations. The phases of sin, the moon god, tracked night by night for the past lunar cycle. You take a breath and begin the process of transcribing the data onto a formal, archival quality tablet. Your stylus moves with precise intention. On the fifth day, sin was low in the eastern horizon. The descriptions are simple, but the implications are profound. Historians still argue whether Babylonian astronomical records were primarily practical, guiding planting seasons and festivals, or whether they reflected a deeper quest for cosmic understanding. As your stylus moves steadily across the clay, you suspect it's both. For the priests and scholars who will consult this tablet, these notes are essential to determining when to perform the next New Year's festival, when to make offerings, or when to prepare for potential omens. You glance at the next observation. On the 12th day, Venus rose before sunrise in the east. You press the signs carefully, recalling how your instructors always emphasized that even minor errors in astronomical records could result in misaligned festivals or misinterpretations of divine will. You think of the ancient scholars who first devised these systems using simple sightlines, water clocks, and patient observation to chart the slow dance of celestial bodies across the Babylonian sky. The idea that you are part of this long, unbroken tradition fills you with a subtle, solemn pride. As you finish logging the planet's movement, you add the standard concluding note. May the gods bless this record and guide its interpretation. A formula, yes, but one that underscores the weight of what you've just done. Because this isn't just about tracking stars, it's about preserving the fragile balance between heaven and earth. You pause briefly to flex your wrist, noticing how the firelight catches on the smooth surface of the drying tablets stacked nearby, dozens of them, each carrying observations, contracts, rituals, and stories, all pressed into clay by hands like yours. The astronomer leans over your shoulder, nods in approval, then takes the completed tablet to set it near the others, being prepared for firing in the temple's kiln, a process that will harden the clay, making it impervious to time, water, even war. You've seen how these fired tablets survive for centuries, outlasting empires and rulers, buried beneath sand and stone until unearthed by future generations. Your mind drifts for a moment. Will someone, millennia from now, hold this very tablet in their hands, marveling at the precision of your marks, puzzling over the observations of planets long since moved on from these positions? It's a humbling thought. You return your focus to the task as the astronomer hands you another set of notes, this time predictions for the upcoming eclipse. You feel a slight thrill of excitement. Eclipses are always important, often laden with omens that can influence political decisions or royal decrees. You press the first line into the clay. In the coming month, on the 28th day, sin will be obscured. You pause for a moment, considering how many lives this simple prediction might touch. The king, advised by temple scholars, may postpone a military campaign. Farmers might delay their harvests. Priests may organize special purification rituals. And all of it begins here, with these marks in this clay. Your stylus moves steadily as you complete the sequence of predictions, durations, timing, visual descriptions. Then, finally, the ritual recommendation: sacrifices to be made on the evening prior in the sanctuary of Shamash. You press the final wedge, then set the tablet aside with a deep, satisfied breath. This is why you became a scribe, not for the contracts or inventories, though those are important, but for the chance to record something so much larger than yourself: the movement of the heavens, the rhythm of the cosmos, as seen from the heart of Babylon. You glance out toward the darkening sky, where the first stars now prick through the velvet night. You recognize them, of course. Ishtar, shining bright in the west, the Pleiades clustered tight together above the rooftops, and you know that soon someone else will observe them, measure their positions, and bring that information back to you so you can write it down and send it forward into the future. You gather your stylus and clay tools, wiping them clean with a damp cloth, and prepare to close up for the night. But you know that tomorrow, and every day after, the work will continue, because Babylon runs on record keeping, and the stars don't wait for anyone. The moon now hangs high above Babylon, casting its pale light across the city's rooftops and the towering silhouette of the ziggurat. Inside the aduba, the lamps flicker as you prepare for one of the most delicate tasks in a scribe's repertoire: transcribing a mythological text. This isn't about trade or law or astronomy. It's about stories, the great epics and poems that give Babylon its soul. You smooth the soft clay, your fingers moving with reverence, because this particular tablet will preserve a fragment of the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the most revered tales in all of Mesopotamia. You've copied portions of it before, but each time feels new, as if you're helping breathe life once again into the king of Uruk and his wild companion Enkidu. You press the opening lines into the clay. He who saw the deep, the foundation of the country. The words come easily. You've memorized much of the epic by now, but you still consult the master copy laid out beside you, ensuring that each sign is perfectly replicated. The language of myth demands a different kind of precision, not just factual accuracy, but poetic rhythm. Each symbol must flow into the next, the spacing deliberate, the alignment clean. Historians still debate whether these literary texts were intended primarily for ritual recitation, for royal entertainment, or for educational purposes within the Adaba. But as your stylus moves through the verses, you understand that myth serves all these functions at once, instructing, entertaining, and connecting the present to the mythic past. You pause as you reach the description of the mighty walls of Uruk, marveling at how this story blends the human and the divine, the mortal and the eternal. It's not so different from your own work as a scribe, pressing mortal thoughts into clay in the hope they might achieve a kind of immortality. You continue through the tale, Gilgamesh's meeting with Enkidu, their friendship forged in battle, their quest to slay Humbaba, guardian of the cedar forest. Your stylus carefully carves out the names of places that, to your mind, exist only in these lines. The vast steppe, the sacred mountains, the terrifying forest where gods and monsters dwell. You pause to flex your wrist, already sore from the steady pressure required for these intricate symbols. The air in the Aduba has grown cooler, and the sounds from the street outside have faded to a distant hum of late-night merchants and prayers. But you press on, because this story must be preserved, carried forward for those who will come after you, just as scribes, before you preserved it for your own generation. You reach the poignant scene where Enkidu dreams of the house of dust, the shadowy realm of the dead. You press each sign with care, feeling the weight of the story's sorrow, its meditation on mortality and the limits of human power. You wonder briefly whether your own name will endure, or whether it too will be carried away by time, lost even as your handwriting survives on these tablets. The instructor walks past, glancing over your shoulder, then nods in approval at your careful work. You finish the current section of the tale, adding the customary colophon, this tablet copied by the hand of your name, Scribe of Babylon, for the Aduba of the Temple of Marduk. Then you roll your personal seal along the edge, a small but distinct mark of your presence, your contribution to this ancient literary chain. You set the completed tablet gently onto the drying rack, where it will rest alongside others filled with similar tales of gods and heroes, kings and monsters, all inscribed by countless scribes across the centuries. For a moment, you sit back, letting the story's final echoes fade in your mind, replaced by the steady rhythm of the Aduba, the scrape of styluses, the murmur of instructors, the occasional yawn of a weary apprentice. Then, as always, you clean your tools, flex your fingers, and prepare for the next task. Because in Babylon, myth is as much a part of life as law or commerce, and scribes like you are the guardians of those stories, ensuring they are never lost, never forgotten, always ready to speak anew through the soft, silent language of clay. You rise to your feet, stretching your back, then glance at the master copy of the Epic once more before tucking it away in its protective reed case. You smile softly, even here, in the quiet of the Aduba, surrounded by the smell of damp clay and lamp oil. You can feel the distant roar of Gilgamesh, the whispers of the gods. the eternal pulse of Babylon's mythic heart, and you know, deep in your bones, that tomorrow will bring yet another opportunity to add your voice, however small, to that endless, timeless chorus. The soft glow of oil lamps casts long, dancing shadows along the walls of the Adaba as you return to your place, settling into the evening's next assignment, a legal deposition. These tablets are some of the most formal and consequential documents you produce. Unlike mythological texts or personal letters, there is no room for interpretation here, only cold, precise fact. You smooth the tablet with deliberate care, the clay slightly cooler now in the night air. The case involves a dispute over the ownership of land, a common matter in a city where property boundaries are as carefully maintained as the temple walls. You review the notes provided by the senior scribe outlining the case. Two brothers arguing over a parcel of irrigated farmland along the eastern canal, their father's inheritance unclear due to a missing will. Your stylus presses into the clay with the standard legal opening. In the court of the elders of Babylon, on the day of Shamash, the sun god, patron of justice, is always invoked first. It's a reminder that every legal proceeding is watched not only by human judges, but by the divine. You continue. Before witnesses, the matter of the sons of Ursin was brought forth. Each word is selected with utmost precision, every name, date, and measure carefully logged. Historians still debate whether these legal records were primarily for the judges, for the litigants, or as a permanent safeguard against future disputes. But for you, their purpose is clear: to create an unassailable record that will stand the test of time, surviving floods, wars, even the collapse of dynasties. You pause to flex your fingers, then inscribe the core of the testimony. The elder brother claims full inheritance, stating that his father, Ursin, declared the land his before the assembled elders on the last feast of Akitu. You press the next line, recording the rebuttal. The younger brother contests this, stating that no such declaration was made and that the land was to be divided equally. The words are tense, formal, stripped of the heated emotion that no doubt filled the room during the actual hearing. But that's your job, to take raw human conflict and reduce it to clean, immutable signs. You wonder, as you press the final line of the testimony, whether the brothers will ever reconcile, or whether this record will be the only thing left of their fractured relationship. You add the list of witnesses next: local, elders, a temple priest, and a merchant who claims to have been present during the supposed declaration. Each name is pressed carefully into the clay, ensuring that no one can later claim they weren't involved. Finally, you close the deposition with the customary legal formula, thus recorded and sealed in the presence of the court for all generations to know. You roll the court's official seal across the tablet's edge, a complex image of Shamash seated on his throne, with the scales of justice beside him. The seal confirms the document's authenticity, a visual declaration that this is no casual note, but an official act of Babylonian law. You place the finished tablet gently among others in the legal archive, where it will dry and be stored, potentially referenced decades from now, if the land is ever contested again. You pause for a moment, staring at the stack of similar tablets, a silent testimony to the city's complex network of rights, duties, and obligations. The thought strikes you. Babylon doesn't run on force alone. It runs on records, on the quiet, deliberate acts of scribes like you who press the city's truths into clay, making them as permanent as stone. You wipe the residual clay from your stylus, then glance at the next assignment waiting for you. Yet another legal case, this one involving a disputed marriage contract. You let out a quiet sigh. In Babylon, disputes over dowries, inheritance, and land seem as endless as the Euphrates itself. But you know your role. Not to judge, not to advise, but to record, to ensure that what was said, what was claimed, what was decided, is never lost, no matter how many years or generations pass. You smooth the next tablet, press the standard opening line once more, and begin to inscribe. Because while kings make decrees and soldiers wage wars, it is the scribes who ensure that memory itself endures. And here, in the quiet flicker of lamplight, with only the steady scratch of your stylus and the faint murmur of other scribes at work, you feel the profound weight of that responsibility. A weight carried not with glory, but with quiet, steadfast duty. The lamps are nearly burned low, their wicks sputtering as the last of the oil is consumed. But there is still one more task before you can rest, preparing a ritual tablet for an upcoming ceremony at the Temple of Marduk. Unlike contracts or legal records, ritual tablets carry a different kind of weight, not legal, but spiritual. You move with particular care as you smooth the clay, ensuring the surface is flawless. This tablet will accompany priests during the New Year festival, one of the most important events in the Babylonian religious calendar. Your stylus begins with a standard invocation. To Marduk, Lord of Lords, who decrees the fates, every ceremony begins here, recognizing the deity's sovereignty over both gods and men. You continue transcribing the precise ritual instructions dictated by the chief priest himself. The order of the sacrifices, first a lamb, then offerings of dates and beer. The specific prayers to be recited, invoking protection over the city and a favorable flood from the Euphrates. Each word is pressed into the clay with deliberate precision, knowing that even a single misplaced wedge could result in a flawed ritual, or worse, offend the gods. Historians still argue whether scribes like you ever had input in shaping these ceremonial texts, or whether you served solely as recorders. But as you carefully space the next line, you know that your role, though quiet, is essential. Without the scribe, there can be no ceremony, no prayer formalized into lasting, permanent form. You pause briefly to flex your fingers, sore from hours of steady work, then resume, describing the processional route from the Temple of Marduk to the riverbank, where the priests will offer libations to honor Ea, the god of water. You press the signs for each of the gods invoked, Anu, Enlil, Ishtar. Their symbols have passed through the hands of generations of scribes before you, unchanged, unbroken, a sacred thread woven through the centuries. The next section details the recitation of the Enuma Elish, the Epic of Creation, performed before the gathered priests and city officials. You smile softly to yourself. You've copied that story many times, and yet it always feels new. A reminder of how Babylon believes the universe itself was shaped by the victory of Marduk over the chaos goddess Tiamat. You inscribe the instruction for the priest to hold the sacred staff while reciting a gesture of authority and continuity. You can almost picture the scene, the massive crowd gathered in the temple courtyard, the incense thick in the air, the chant of priests echoing off the mud brick walls, their voices rising in unison as the ancient words are spoken once again. Your stylus moves steadily, inscribing the final line of the ritual. Thus, the blessings of Marduk shall be secured for Babylon. You set the tablet aside carefully, ensuring that it will dry without warping or cracking. Then, you add your personal mark discreetly. Along the edge, a small sign that though your name may never be spoken aloud during the ceremony, your hand is there, present in every word, every gesture, every blessing uttered. You stand and stretch, moving toward the open doorway of the Adaba for a breath of the cool night air. From here, you can just make out the torch-lit steps of the ziggurat, where priests are already beginning their preparations for the festival, their white linen robes billowing gently in the evening breeze. The scent of juniper smoke and baking bread drifts through the streets, mingling with the ever-present hum of the city that never quite sleeps. You reflect on how your work will guide the hands of the priests in a few short days, how your careful inscriptions will help ensure the favor of the gods and the continued prosperity of Babylon. It's a humbling realization, because while kings rule and warriors fight, it is the scribe who ensures that the rituals are preserved and performed correctly, that the delicate balance between humanity and the divine is maintained. You turn back to your workbench, gathering your tools and wiping down your stylus, preparing to close the day's labor. But even as you set your implements aside, you know that your work is never truly done. The city breathes in rhythm with the clay tablets you and your fellow scribes create. Each mark a pulse in the living body of Babylon's culture, religion, and identity. You glance at the drying racks, lined with the day's labor, legal decrees, trade records, astronomical observations, myths, and now, this latest ritual tablet, each one a testament to the quiet, persistent craft of the scribe. And as you extinguish the small lamp by your mat, plunging your corner of the Adaba into darkness, you feel a quiet satisfaction, because tomorrow, at dawn, the stylus will press once more into the clay, and you will again take up your role in the eternal story of Babylon. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight filter through the narrow slits of the Adaba's mud brick walls, you resume your place on the woven reed mat, stretching your sore shoulders and preparing for another long day of scribal duties. But today's task is slightly different, and it fills you with a mixture of pride and trepidation. You've been asked to prepare a dedicatory inscription for a new building project commissioned by one of the city's wealthiest merchants. Such inscriptions are no small matter. They are intended to endure for generations, pressed into bricks, etched into stone, or set atop doorways as a declaration of the owner's status and piety. You smooth the clay tablet carefully, reviewing the merchant's instructions an inscription to be baked onto a series of foundation bricks for a new warehouse near the harbor, it must invoke the favor of Marduk, declare the merchant's loyalty to the city, and proudly state his lineage for all who pass by to see. Your stylus begins with the traditional invocation. For the life of merchant's name, servant of Marduk, you press the signs slowly, deliberately. Each wedge must be precise. Errors on a dedicatory inscription are considered not just mistakes, but potential insults to both the gods and the commissioner. Historians still argue whether these public inscriptions were more about genuine religious devotion or simply exercises in social prestige. But here in the Aduba, seated cross-legged on your mat, you know that the two are often intertwined. The merchant wants the god's blessing, certainly, but he also wants his name immortalized in clay and brick, bound forever to the structure he has built. You continue, who constructed this storehouse with great care and piety. The phrase is standard, but no less weighty for its familiarity, because centuries from now, should these bricks be uncovered by some future generation, the merchant's name will live again, carried forward by your carefully pressed marks. You press on. May Marduk grant him long life, prosperity, and many sons. You pause briefly to consider the commonality of such blessings, woven through nearly every inscription you've ever prepared. It's as though the ancient hopes of all Babylonians can be distilled into these simple desires: longevity, wealth, family. You press the final line. This brick is set for the strength of the house and the honor of the gods. Then, as required, you add the construction date, referencing the reigning king and the current lunar cycle. Dating these inscriptions ensures that future readers can place them precisely in Babylon's long and complex timeline. Finally, you roll your personal seal discreetly along the tablet's corner, a tiny mark almost invisible to passers-by, but present all the same, the silent signature of the scribe behind the merchant's grand display of faith and status. You set the completed tablet aside to dry, knowing that copies of the inscription will be pressed into multiple bricks, baked, and then set into the foundation of the warehouse. Your words, your work, will quite literally become part of the structure itself. You lean back, flexing your wrist, and reflecting on the profound permanence of such tasks. While so many of the city's voices are fleeting, spoken in the marketplace, whispered in dark alleys, or shouted in the courts, your voice through the clay may endure, unchanged for centuries. You glance at the pile of similar dedicatory tablets stacked nearby, each one a testament to the ambition and devotion of Babylon's citizens. The builder who erects a new home, the merchant expanding his warehouse, the temple adding a new wing to honor the gods, all rely on you, the scribe, to ensure that their deeds are properly recorded and immortalized. You rise briefly to stretch your legs, stepping outside to where the morning sun glints off the waters of the Euphrates in the distance. Boats, laden with grain and timber, drift along the current, their crews shouting to one another as they navigate the bustling harbor. You breathe deeply, taking in the mix of river air, baking bread, and the faint scent of clay dust that clings to your skin. Returning to your mat, you clean your stylus, and prepare for the next commission, a dedicatory inscription for a small family altar, this time commissioned by a humble potter in one of the city's southern districts. The inscription is simpler, but no less important. Declaration of gratitude to Ishtar for the safe birth of a daughter. You smooth the clay and begin once more. To Ishtar, who grants life and watches over the household of Potter's name, your stylus moves steadily, crafting the phrases that will adorn the Potter's altar, a place where his family will offer prayers, burn incense, and mark the passage of seasons. You add the final blessing. May Ishtar protect this house and all within. Then your seal, once again. Setting the tablet aside, you feel a quiet satisfaction, because whether for merchant or potter, for grand warehouse or humble altar, your work as a scribe ensures that these moments, these acts of devotion, are captured and preserved. Your words give form to the invisible threads of Babylonian life, weaving together the personal, the public, the sacred, and the mundane into a single, enduring tapestry. And as you glance once more at the drying tablets arrayed before you, you are reminded that though your own name may fade, your work will endure, pressed into walls, buried in foundations, whispered in the rituals, and remembered in the silence of time. As the day draws to a close, and the orange glow of the setting sun fades behind the ziggurat, you settle in for what has become one of your favorite duties, the quiet, contemplative task of reviewing and archiving the day's completed tablets. This final step is as important as the act of writing itself, for a tablet improperly stored can crumble, warp, or be lost to the chaotic bustle of Babylon's life. You move with care to the drying racks, where rows upon rows of tablets sit in various stages of hardening, some still soft to the touch, others already firm, their wedge-shaped signs crisp and permanent. Today's work has been diverse. Legal documents settling inheritance disputes, personal letters full of longing and unresolved debts, mythological stories carrying the weight of gods and heroes, astronomical observations that will guide the planting of crops and the timing of festivals, and dedicatory inscriptions destined to be baked into brick and stone. All of them are yours, their shapes familiar beneath your fingertips as you conduct a final inspection, ensuring each is ready to transition from temporary clay to eternal record. You set aside a few that need minor corrections. A sign pressed too deeply here, a wedge slightly smudged there. These small imperfections must be fixed before firing, lest they distort the meaning or weaken the tablet's integrity. Historians still debate the extent to which Babylonian scribes viewed their work as art, craft, or mere labor. But here, in the hushed sanctum of the Adaba, surrounded by the quiet rustle of reeds and the faint hiss of oil lamps, you know the answer is all three. Because while your stylus might seem like a simple tool, it is also an instrument of memory, an extension of the city's consciousness, preserving everything from the grandest royal edict to the most intimate personal letter. You glance over to the kiln where the chief archivist is already preparing tomorrow's batch of tablets for firing. The process is precise and unforgiving. Too much heat, and the tablets crack. too little, and they remain fragile, vulnerable to time and the elements. Once fired, though, they become nearly indestructible, a paradoxical mix of fragility and endurance. You feel a quiet satisfaction knowing that your work will outlast you, perhaps even outlast Babylon itself. You think of the city's future. Will these tablets be read centuries from now by other scribes? Will they marvel at your steady hand, or puzzle over the nuances of your phrasing? Or will they lie buried beneath the sands, waiting silently until the world is ready to listen again? You set aside the final tablet of the day, a long legal decree resolving a complex trade dispute between two rival merchants, and roll the official court seal across its edge. The intricate image of Shamash, god of justice, now marks it as an official record, unassailable and complete. With the day's work done, you clean your stylus and reed pads, setting them carefully in their storage case, then rise to extinguish the lamps, one by one. The room grows progressively darker until only a faint glow remains from the dying embers of the central hearth. You step outside into the cool night air, stretching your arms as you gaze up at the familiar constellations, Ishtar's bright presence, Venus shimmering above the rooftops, the tight cluster of the Pleiades, the sweeping arc of the Milky Way, known to you as the River of Heaven. You breathe deeply, inhaling the mingled scents of river silt, baked bread, and the faint traces of incense wafting from distant temple altars. Babylon is quiet now, its markets closed, its courtyards empty, save for the occasional guard or stray dog. You glance one last time at the Aduba, its sturdy walls housing the day's labor, its shelves lined with the quiet, unassuming tablets that carry the heartbeat of a civilization. Tomorrow you will return, take up your stylus once more, and continue this endless, necessary work. Because in Babylon, the scribe is more than just a writer. You are the custodian of culture, the keeper of memory, the quiet voice that ensures nothing is ever truly forgotten. You turn toward home, your sandals scuffing softly against the packed earth, your mind still lingering on the tablets you've left behind. The contracts, the myths, the prayers, the stories that will endure long after you've gone. And as the city fades into darkness, you smile faintly, knowing that your work, pressed into simple clay, has already become something more, a part of history. The night deepens, the streets of Babylon falling silent beneath the silver glow of the moon. You feel the tension in your shoulders ease, your hands relax, no longer gripping the stylus with its relentless purpose. The air is cooler now, still and calm, carrying only the distant echo of a temple bell, marking the hour of midnight prayers. You breathe in slowly, letting your chest rise and fall with deliberate softness, as though synchronizing your heartbeat with the steady pulse of the sleeping city. The faint crackle of drying clay from within the Aduba seems to fade as your thoughts drift outward, beyond the boundaries of Babylon, beyond the hum of daily life, to the wide, open silence of the desert night. Stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, the same constellations you carefully recorded on tablets, the same that guided your ancestors and will guide those who come after. You feel a quiet pride, tempered by humility, knowing that your role, simple, silent, unseen, is part of something much larger than yourself. You exhale slowly, allowing the weariness of the day to soften into a gentle sense of completion. Tomorrow will bring more clay, more words, more stories pressed into permanence. But for now, in this moment, you rest. Let the sound of your own breathing merge with the hush of the night. Let the memories of Babylon's bustling markets, soaring ziggurats, and flickering lamplight dissolve into a peaceful stillness. The city sleeps, and so can you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Sweet dreams.